Uh, Welcome to our podcast. Today we'll be discussing certain important legal issues, and on the panel there are five people. Two people who are going to be introducing themselves and are very well versed in what we are about to discuss and deliberate further, and three people from the Legal Services Committee. That is being myself, Sudiksha, Afra here, Afra Fatima, and then Sadhna. We are part of the PS Legal Services Committee, and the esteemed panelists, the other two of them, will be introducing themselves. We have with us Saket sir and Sukuta ma'am. Please, over to you.
Okay, so hi, I'm very happy to be here today. I am Dr. Sukrita Lahiri, and I've done my PhD in gender studies and international relations. So my interests lie in feminist studies and gender studies, and so I think I'm looking forward to this discussion that we're going to have today. I also teach, I'm based in Bangalore right now, so I have been teaching sociology and society and law, political theory. So yeah, that's a very brief introduction, and we'll move on to Saket sir.
Yeah, hi. Um, I'm Saket. I teach law at a law school. Um, Happy to be here to talk about the issues that we have here. Yeah.
Yeah. So today we'll be mostly focusing on the broad topic of gender-based violence, and we'll be going into the niches of it and the current problems that we are facing, like how it works in the society currently. So firstly we'll be dealing with the legal approach to it, and then we'll move on to the sociological aspects of it. So firstly, let's start off by defining a few terms, right? Because gender-based violence can be a very broad topic in itself. So, so what do you think gender-based violence would be classified as in the best way possible? Like, it can be a mix of what both of you can have, just anything to say about it.
Gender-based violence is obviously like the term itself is suggesting that it is got to be based on any or all aspects of gender, and here it also becomes very important to understand the difference between sex and gender, which is also not very widely or clearly understood. So we can come to that at a later point. But yeah, gender-based violence has to be based on all or any one of the aspects of gender.
Yes.
That's what I would like to say at this point. Anything you want to add on?
Yeah, it's interesting to discuss this topic, gender-based violence, in a country where the legal structure actually does not understand the difference between sex and gender. It clearly does not define it. Also, so to say, the current structure does not understand the difference between sex and gender. It does not define. If you look at the criminal codes also that we have, where they define a man and a woman and a child and a person and all of that, you will realize how blurred is that definition. So the understanding isn't clear. So I still have difficulty in understanding what's gender-based violence in the legal structure of India, when the judiciary and the legislature has not come to a consensus as to what's gender and what's sex. That's one. Second, I mean, there is certainly some kind of understanding of protection of vulnerable groups,
Yes,
specific to women and transgenders. We'll talk about it. How far are we, and where have we reached in that, in actually protecting these groups against violence? Yeah.
Okay, so I think there's a common consensus among us that the definition of gender itself is not clearly defined, and even if it were to be defined, it's not being accepted in the way it should be legally and socially. So in the term gender-based violence itself, with the problem being there in gender, do you believe there is a problem in what violence is perceived as? Because do you feel like the idea of violence being only something physical is very problematic, because violence can be a lot of other things? So do you think the definition itself can be problematic if you are going to be considering violence as just something that's conventionally physical or something along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the definition of violence needs to be broadened significantly to include all kinds of violence. And we know that mental kind of torture, mental harassment is one of the most common and most widely practiced kinds of violence in the domestic spaces. And it is widely practiced, and yet it cannot be pinned down as violence because it's happening at such a regular basis, everyday practice. So the definition of violence needs to be broadened. Only physical violence says nothing about what violence is. When we talk about gender-based violence, there are all kinds of violent practices that should be considered as gender-based violence.
So it could be like physical, psychological, economic. So
Yeah.
how big of a role do you think economic violence plays against gender minorities or like the oppressed genders especially in India?
Yeah. I think that's the
Biggest
That's the
problem.
biggest, I think that's the base of it. I think the way our society is structured, not only in India but generally the way patriarchy functions as a form of power between the two sexes, between the two genders, when we're talking about a heteronormative kind of a society. Yeah, I think the economics is the base of it, because that is how the domestic space is functioning. You need some people to take care of the household for the economy to function. And if that stops happening, if that no one is accounting for what is happening in the household, in the domestic spaces, if that is not accounted for, like it is not accounted for now, we don't know how the economy is functioning, or if one day it stops happening, then what happens to the economy. Like Nivedita Menon also says in her book, the economy will collapse like a house of cards, if like a pack of cards, if we have to start accounting for like monetarily accounting for domestic work. So yeah, I
So-
think economics is a big aspect that we have to consider.
So since you brought up marriage, would it be far-fetched to say that the way marriage is constructed in the society, like the Indian society right now, is sort of what is perpetuating this gender-based violence, because it silences a lot of things? Because the way the marriage as an institute is structured itself is a way where it shields these like
Yeah.
acts that are happening against these genders, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. Like marriage as an institution is very problematic because, of course, we start again from the heteronormative structure of marriage, because it is not recognizing the all the spectrum that there exists. There is only heteronormativity when we come to marriage in India. And so it begins from there. The problem begins from there, that it is an institution, and only certain kinds of marriages are recognized by the state. And what is a marriage? Like, until and unless the state as an institution comes into this scenario, there is no marriage. Like, a couple can live together and they can do whatever they want together, but the coming in of the state is what is happening. When the marriage is being recognized by the state, that is the marriage. So, and then we have to go into inquiring about what are the interests of the state. Like, if you're bringing in the state into a relationship between two people, then what are the interests of the state over here to sustain that kind of a relationship? So that's why only certain kinds of relationships will be recognized by the state. What are the interests of the state? The interests of the state are to keep the status quo going, to keep the society as it is going, or even further worsen it. And so, like, heteronormativity again is at the base of it. It's at the core of it. And if you're talking about violence, like our topic of discussion today, gender-based violence in marriages, there are all kinds of gender-based violence in marriages. Like, you talk about marital rape, which is probably, if you want to think of it, the most extreme kind of violence, which is also not recognized. Or you think of economic dependence of women, and why can't they leave abusive marriages. All of those things come into the status quo of what is the state doing in the institution of marriage.
So
Speaking of sexual abuse and economic abuse, Section 3 of the Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act, it recognizes sexual abuse and economic abuse. But when we look at the definition of sexual abuse, it does not recognize marital rape, but in fact it just says conduct of a sexual nature that abuses, humiliates, degrades, or otherwise violates the dignity of a woman. Of course, when we look at it broadly, this includes marital rape, but judiciary does not recognize marital rape under this still. And when we look at economic abuse, the economic abuse, when interpreted broadly, to it should not only include a deprivation of economic or financial resources such as basic subsistence, but it should also, this is what the statute implies, but it should also look at deprivation of a woman's control over her own economic resources, right? Such as deprivation of right of employment and outside the home, or a situation in which a woman is forced to turn over all her earnings to the household, etc. So this also should be recognized by the court, because this is a widely practiced
acts of violence against genders.
It's widely practiced in India, where women have to turn over their earnings to their in-laws, or they are not allowed to work because they have to look over the households. They have to focus on giving birth, taking care of the child, taking care of a husband, taking care of husband's parents, etc. So this is also something that the judiciary should recognize as economic abuse.
That's true.
Also, at the core of all of this, law does not have miraculous solutions. You're talking about judiciary, whether judiciary recognizes something or legislature recognizes something. We can keep deciding who should actually recognize it. But the problem is the way the society is structured. And then at the core of it, if you see, the basis of all of these laws which we have specific to women and with specific respect to marriage and all of that, majority of it is actually coming from customs, which serves as source of law. You look at, because we're talking about violence and it's so multi-layered, and then there's physical aspect of it, and there's economical, and then there's mental, and there's psychological, and there's social aspect. If you look at the economic violence which is committed by society against women, the primary issue which I look at is that women did not, for a very long period of time, from the beginning of this beautiful society that we have till 2005, I'm only talking about Hindu women right now. Why am I talking about only Hindu women? Because Hindu Succession Amendment Act came in 2005. Before that, women were not considered co-partners as in equal share. With who? With their brothers. So male always had the right of property in their ancestral property as well as self-acquired property of the father. 2005, this looks like, oh my god, a progressive era. We ushered in a progressive era, and now Hindu women have right to property in the ancestral property. Again, be mindful, it's only the ancestral property, it's not the self-acquired property of parents. That is one. The second, so it sounds like a celebratory moment. I remember people were super happy back then, and even today it is one of the most progressive things which Indian legislature has done. And we celebrate it, but then look at the reality of it. We don't have a data to, the sample size is not large enough. There have been a few studies from certain law schools and from certain groups to see what is to get the impact assessment of post Hindu Succession Amendment Act 2005. We do not have data on how many women have actually benefited from it. So now when we don't have data, what do? One simple thing which we can do is we can look around. I look at my family, I look at so many families, women do not get the property, and it's automatic and it's very natural that men get the property, brothers get the property, yes. And then I was recently as in it's been a while, I was having a conversation with one of my aunts, and I was telling her that you should have property, and you should ask, your brother should be sharing property with you. It was interesting when they said that shouldn't law just make it mandatory for the property to be divided that way, that the property automatically bestows on women and women does not have to necessarily ask for it from the brother. The question is, why would she say that? Think about it, the cost of asking that property is very high. The entire patriarchal setup, which consists of father and brother and their interest at the helm, would be very hostile. So then this is the core, this is where the economic abuse starts from, where woman does not have a right to property and she has to be dependent on the property of either of the male who she is dependent on.
And asking for it would be considered as greed when it's natural.
Absolutely. The antagonization of women just because they are asking for their share. which is, again, I would say they're asking for a very small amount of share. Yeah, from generations, millennia, they have not gotten anything, and now if they're asking for at least just the equal rights or some rights in the property, it's the greed and it's the antagonism of women which happen. Yeah, so
Absolutely.
that's
Yeah, that's a lot and extensive on economic abuse. So going a little back to what ma'am was saying, so you did talk a lot about how the state interferes and that becomes problematic, right? But to what extent can the state actually interfere or not, considering how private spaces is where most of these acts take place, right? So unless these private spaces are also regulated by the law or there is an interference of the state, there cannot be progress, right? But again, that's going to become not so productive if we are going to consider the argument that the state interfering itself is what is perpetuating such a patriarchal setup. So what do you have to say about this?
Yeah. I think it just goes back to the interest of the state. Like, we need the state to interfere. We need the state to interfere in the interest of all parties involved. But historically, consistently, we have been seeing that the state has been interfering only in the interest of a single party and not all the parties involved. So we need the state to be there. But again, going back to some of the parts of the book that we have discussed, there was a ruling by the court which said that the fundamental rights stop at the doorstep of the household, right?
Yeah, first.
Yeah, so I mean, then if we are going into the discussion of fundamental rights, and fundamental rights is for everyone at all points of time. They do not stop at the doorstep, but that was ruled by the court. So then, yeah, I think we need the state to be there, but we need the state to be there for everyone, not only for certain parties.
So the law is sort of biased towards the power,
I mean,
group
even
in
if we have the laws themselves, so also just mentioned that it's as late as 2005 that the inheritance laws came in for women. But even if the laws exist, we know what the implementation is, because again, the interest of the state and all the wings of the state who are responsible for the implementation of the laws, all the wings of the state have also certain biased agendas playing out.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. So
And like ma'am was saying, that she was talking about this case where the Delhi High Court said that fundamental rights stop at the doorstep of the family, right? So this was a case of restitution of conjugal rights, where a woman was fighting for her right to leave the household of the marriage household and not return. So this is where the Delhi High Court said this, right? But then again, when we look at the laws exist, especially Domestic Violence Act, etc. These laws exist to protect women. And when we look at a lot of laws, they all exist to protect women, they exist to protect the minorities. But when the minorities go to the court asking for their rights, asking for their fundamental rights, this is what the court has to say, that the fundamental rights stop when we are looking at a private aspect, that is marriage. So that is something extremely ironic.
Yeah.
absolutely.
I mean, one of the things that come to mind is that when the minorities or the people who are actually facing the assaults are going to the court, to the police, to the any wing of the state again, what is often heard back is also that you should marry your rapist.
Yes.
And that's a very common, very often heard thing we keep hearing again and again, that you should marry your rapist. Or again, what was she wearing, who was she with. Around the Nirbhaya case, I remember that some ministers were saying that if you eat chow mein, you will be raped. I mean, it's not even about your clothes anymore, it's about what you eat. Because chow mein is had, I guess chow mein is had by people from the northeast, and then people from the northeast, women from the northeast are loose characters, and so of course you're bound to be raped because you eat chow mein. So how do you make sense of a state like this? It's so absurd. It's so absurd, but it's also not, it's very calculated absurd. It's not like a stupid absurd that does not make sense. It's very calculative kind of absurd. So
Yeah, so since we brought up in several instances, not fully but sort of, on how there are layers of discrimination, right? Some people tend to have be discriminated more than the others because of how much more of a minority, like the levels of minority they have. That's how I can say it. So how do you think the law fails in recognizing these kind of people, like who are facing layers of discrimination?
While we discuss law, also a very important point is law does not offer a magic wand solution. If we look at the core functions of law, the kind of law we have, like the written kind of law, it does not offer a magical solution. So that's one. When your society is so regressive, then what kind of solution are we looking from law? So that's one. But then point number two is law does offer some kind of solution. What kind of solution does it offer? Well, it provides a direction in the way legal institutions, which are the core institutions of the country in the formal sense, look at the violence which women, specifically talking only about women, so we'll stay with that, but women, I will also want to say transgender persons, go through. And there are two wings that we are primarily concerned with when we are thinking of a redressal, or when we are thinking of what law does. It's not executive that we are looking at, it's actually primarily we are looking at legislature and judiciary. And of course, in the previous years, legislature has come up with certain kind of laws. In the erstwhile IPC and also now the new BNS, there is a specific chapter on offences against women. It does include certain definitions, certain offences, and those definitions have also gone through certain modifications over the years. Earlier the definition of rape was the penetration had to be penal penetration, and then it became to now any object inserted, and then it just continues. What I'm saying is there has been amendments over the years. At some point of time, the case of Lakshmi, that proved to be that became a landmark event in the legislative evolution with respect to offences against women. The acid attack was specifically included because it was being committed against women. It does not say that the victim necessarily has to be a woman, but then if you look at the surrounding circumstances which led to the introduction of provision, penal provision on acid attack, so that will tell you that it was specific offence against women. That's why we have that provision. So of course there has been evolution in terms of how the statutes are trying to define offences and violence against women. While that's there, I would still say that we are very much behind in terms of where we should be in terms of protecting women who go on violence on day-to-day basis. Because if you look at it, it's not women-centric discussion which we are having.
Right.
It's a bunch of, if you look at the legislature, the structural, the ground level, just look at the legislature. There are more men discussing about women issues. I don't think, I cannot categorically deny that men cannot talk about women-related issue, because here I am. But we'll see how much merit is there in that, in what I say later. But then it's like a bunch of men in parliament talking about women-related issues. So it's a parliament-centric definition. Where if you look at the definition, you look at the chapter violence offences against women, it looks like yes, there's a progressive chapter right there which specifically deals with violence against women. But then where is women in that? Because from the very conveniently certain things have been taken out of the definition. Like ma'am was also saying, offences against women, rape, marital rape is not recognized. Now if marital rape is not recognized, then where is women at the center of this discussion? What is at the center of this discussion? It's the family, the patriarchal family setup. The biggest argument, the biggest proposition that we hear from people who oppose provision on marital rape is that family would be destabilized. Yes. So now we are having a family-centric definition. It's not the victim survivor, which is the woman-centric discussion. So, of course, there has been evolution. I won't say that there is absolutely dismal picture when it comes to the legislative evolution, but I would just say we are not up to the mark. There are so many things. Mammoth changes need to be brought in the legislative framework. And then I feel also that when you look up to the judiciary and you think like judiciary has the solution to all the problems that we have, actually judiciary does not have.
Speaking about judiciary not having solutions, there are multiple cases violence against women that make us realize this. When we look at Mathura's case, it's an extremely old case, but in this case, it was Mathura was a minor tribal woman who was raped in custody, right? It was a case of custodial rape. And in this case, the highest court of the land did not believe what she was saying. And then there's also another case, which is Kailas versus State of Maharashtra. In this case, also a tribal woman, she was paraded in public, she was abused, there was so much violence that was perpetrated against her. And then the punishment that the people who committed this violence, the punishment they received was just 1 year of imprisonment and a fine of 5,000 rupees. So when we look at this, we see that judiciary is not doing what it's supposed to be doing. And like Sir said, that law does not magically offer us all kinds of solutions. But another question we can ask is, shouldn't it be offering us solutions, especially the judiciary?
Yeah.
Just something to add there, because you're talking about, we rightly pointed that shouldn't law offer certain solution. On this juncture, there is a violence which happens from the societal structures which have existed, like the family space, the space which is created because of marriage, the domestic spaces. So these have traditionally existed, yeah. And there we have to see how much space can law create for these victims, survivors, to meet some kind of justice, whatever that is. But another kind of violence which is very widely prevalent and it's also very invisible is, why is it invisible, we'll see later, but look at all of the rape cases which happen in the disturbed areas. Now what do I mean by disturbed areas? I mean these military controlled areas, yeah, primarily where AFSPA is in place, has been in place or had been in place, or maybe now still it's present in a lot of places, or any area which the sovereign state feels of this country feels that it's disturbed area. What happens here? I mean, the powerful military, they go there, and then there's so. I mean, of course, there are all kinds of violence which happens there, specific to violence against women. All kinds of rape, harassment, exploitation, torture. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's the offense of highest degree. Look at what happened in Manipur years back. Yeah, years back, because now I don't know what is happening there right now. Rape of women by the Indian Army. Yeah, and there's all the information out there. So that was one. Rapes which happen, mass rapes which happen in the villages of Kunan Pushpora in Kashmir. They have been in front of judiciary for this many years. There is no redressal from the judiciary because the legal structure is made in a way that, of course, I mean, in front of a sovereign military, like the great powerful Indian military, what can these rape survivors say or do? Yeah. So, I mean, so that's where it comes, that what is the political will? This is the core question where we reach, that what is the political will? The political will is not women-centric in its nature. So it subjects millions, I won't say, women to multiple kinds of violence specific to rape, leaving them without any redressal. Also, just a point to note here, there is absolute immunity to armed members when they commit these acts while they are on duty. Yeah, so.
And there's a point about the military courts also that you can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, military courts are there to prosecute their own members, which are the armed members, but they work in so much opacity. We don't have data. If you go to check data on it, you don't have data to understand what kind of offences are being tried. So that's another layer of violence which happens against women in disturbed areas. Yeah.
And I think that draws back to how you mentioned that it's because it's primarily men who are part of these systems.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
Absolutely.
of course it's in favor of them. So representation again is something that could be said as a solution. It could be a textbook solution, it could be a real solution, but until we reach to that level of representation where women do get to represent themselves equally, I think it's really bleak to see where this will go in a proper direction. So
Yeah, absolutely.
so since you brought a little about definitions, do you think the definition of consent has truly evolved from just absence of resistance to an affirmative yes? Do you think it is actually seen that the definition of consent has been recognized in the way it should be, and not just being seen as absence to resistance?
I mean, we have seen there is evolution of slow, very slow evolution in understanding of consent. whether silence amounts to consent or not, and then whether it has to be oral words or